Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to Focus on Health. I'm your host, Peggy Mello. Today's guest is James Barnes from the law firm of Burke Casserly. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Today we're going to talk about planning for long-term care. Now, it's a pretty complicated issue, isn't it?
There's a lot of information that's out there, but the one thing that people have to understand is, do they have the right information, and do they actually know how this information applies to them, how any rules, how any situations applies to them? What options are out there? That's oftentimes one of the things that we counsel our clients with, is trying to at least have them understand what the rules are, how it applies to their situation, and also what options that they have. We want to provide people with different options and let them know that what the effects of their decisions are going to be, or at least what the effects of the way that they're currently going about things are. So.
Okay, so let's say we're a senior citizen, and we want to talk about different housing options.
Okay.
So the first one would be, let's say, staying at home. Let's talk about that option first.
Well, that's oftentimes, a very important option for people. It is the favorable option. People oftentimes say, how can I have my mother or father, or both my mother and father, or, how can we remain in our home for as long as possible?
Right.
And one of the first things that we'll say to people is, let's see how we can get the home, outfitted for somebody, whether they have disabilities or a certain handicap. Are there things that people can do? There are simple things that can be done. There are more complex things that can be done. But people should, not be limited by the fact that, this is going to be very difficult. This is quite an undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can, we counsel our clients that, maybe this is a really good use of $10,000 or $15,000 to change the way that your house is right now. Maybe we want to put a full bathroom on the first floor, and the bathroom, would have a walk-in shower with a bench that's handicapped accessible.
Right.
Maybe that's a really good use of their money as they, plan for the future, that, will enable them to stay in their house when, possibly, having to go upstairs to go to the bathroom would just not be feasible anymore.
Right.
The AARP lists, some very simple things that people can do. It might be as easy as making sure that there's, handrails going down the stairs on both sides,
right,
and things like that. More complex things could be widening doorways, having ramps in someone's house, to and even including possibly downsizing from a home to a one-floor condo,
right,
to an apartment complex. We oftentimes see people that, whether it's remaining at your home or remaining at a new home, people are oftentimes encouraged by the fact that they have their private residence. And, we've worked with a lot of people that have decided that, maybe it is the right time to go ahead and, put our house on the market, because we can now get a one floor, that's on the first floor, condominium, townhouse, that, really meets our needs. We don't need as much space. Cleaning is less, it has to be cleaned less.
right.
And, it has a lot of the things that we would still want. So
Yeah, plus the fact that in an apartment, it's going to make it less complicated for maintenance, whether they don't have to mow the lawn, they don't have to worry about windows being cleaned or anything like that.
Exactly.
But I also think that making a house handicapped accessible is going to eliminate any risk for injuries. Once somebody breaks a hip, then it's going
Right.
to take a long time for them to recover.
Well, I'd say that we may not eliminate what the risk is, but we're going to try to reduce the risk, and we're also going to try to make it conducive for them to be able to stay there as long as it is safe for them.
Mm-hmm.
Safety is a paramount concern, and there might get to a point where, just because of the way maybe somebody lives at their house by themselves and there's not a lot of other caregivers, family or outside,
Yeah.
even with some handicap accessibility or, improvements to the house, it may not be feasible for them to stay home, but it might change it. I mean, you might get a couple more years, you might get a few more years, and that's very important, whether it's
Right.
6 months to a year. Like I said, a lot of these things can increase the value of a house anyways. So it's something to at least look in and see what the options are, because like I said, people enjoy, there's a real importance to independence and staying at home.
Now,
So-
let's say they're in their home or they're in their apartment and they need assistance during the day. What are their options?
There are a couple different options that people should consider, and it might be as simple as having family members help out. I know from personal experience, maybe a loved one just needs somebody to get their groceries. They can't just get out of the house that often.
Right.
They can still cook for themselves. They can still do their basic cleaning. Their activities of daily living are not really impaired, but they're not as mobile as they used to be. Maybe they're not driving. So maybe if somebody helps out with grocery shopping, or kind of starting to look over paying bills, and comes over and helps with some light cleaning, that might be enough. That may increase to the fact that let's say somebody moves in with a loved one. Now, maybe that's just enough, that there's enough people in the house that looking out for a senior, whether it be somebody's mother, father, or whatever. Maybe that would be enough for them to enough care. The other options are, there are home health care agencies that really provide excellent services. There's different levels of care. Home health care agencies can provide companionship, someone to come over that it's not really a medically needy, but they need somebody to kind of look out. They can provide aides, which that would be a higher level of care, and they can provide nursing services too. So home health care agencies are a very good form, and there's different ways that to pay for that. If somebody does qualify, there are Medicaid programs, community Medicaid programs that pay for home health care. Sometimes people have long-term care insurance policies that provide for home health care benefits. And other people can make it's a good use of their resources to private pay. Maybe they just need somebody to come in for a few hours a day and help out around the house and check somebody's vital signs, make sure that that they're well. Home health care agencies provide excellent services to seniors throughout the capital region and in our communities. So that's one option. Another option that I wanted to mention is adult daycare programs. Let's say that somebody lives with a loved one and they're really able to handle all of the different time periods, evenings, weekends, mornings,
Right.
but there really isn't anybody to provide that care or to provide that extra supervision during the daytime. Maybe the hour 9 to 5, let's just say a normal workday, for instance. In this area, there's some very good adult daycare programs and different models too, socially based programs, and then medical models too that do provide medical services, can help with prescriptions, and can help with vital signs. To and including ones that provide for, somebody has dementia or
I'm
memory
thinking
loss.
Alzheimer's somehow. in my
Exactly.
mind.
Yeah, no, there are programs out there that can, provide that higher level of service, and maybe that is all that family requires, that senior requires, is, a few hours during the day where somebody can go. And the other thing that we found with some clients is that there's an increased socialization. And
Right.
that oftentimes will, be an excellent service in and of itself, that they're with peers, they're with people, there's activities, there's structure, and, it can be better than, watching television alone for several hours a day. So,
Right. And I'm thinking, as for peace of mind of the family member that has to go to work, how do they concentrate on their job all day long when they're worrying about their loved one at home
Right.
and what they're doing?
it's a concern, and oftentimes what we want to see with families is to just relieve some the concerns, to release some of the burdens. It's a very overwhelming feeling for many people. We refer to people sometimes in the sandwich generation. You've got, maybe a middle-aged person that's now caring for a loved one, caring for a mother or father that's a senior.
Mm-hmm.
They've got their children. Maybe in high school or maybe they're college age now, and they've got to worry about that. And then they've got their own professional careers and their lives. So what you want to do is, there's a lot of good people out there that want to do the right thing, that want to help out, but you want to at least provide them with options and let them know that there are other services in the community that are available that can help them, just reduce their burden. And it's also oftentimes a good use of, the seniors' money is to, say, listen, we can allocate, some of so-and-so's income for adult daycare programs, for an aide to come in the house a few hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that people should understand. Those services are out there, and just to be aware of that. People aren't on their own. We live in a time where there are services available. We just have to know that they're out there and be aware of what services entail.
Okay, so let's say they decide they're not going to be in their house or they're not going to be in an apartment. And what are their options for senior housing? What can they do there?
Oftentimes it's a very difficult decision, and it's made at different stages.
Right.
People, we see people sometimes that are on the border of, one level of care versus another. Some people are going to really try to, stay in their house for as long as possible, and maybe they are receiving, maybe they've received, home health care or adult, daycare programs, and that's kind of been one stage of care, so to speak, for them.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are different levels of care provided outside the home. Senior housing options. One option may be an independent living community. Independent living communities, there are very different kinds, but some of it could just be senior housing for senior citizens. They may not be licensed facilities. They might just be, whether they're apartment complexes, sometimes they're places with services. They tend to change, but they are more independent. So there may not be much of a difference between somebody that's living in their private residence and somebody that's living in a senior kind of independent living community. What it does is, again, there'll be increased level of socialization.
Right.
The layout of the apartment or whatever the unit is that they're going to live in will be conducive to a senior. Things may be grouped a little closer together. There may be more handicapped accessibility, but it is a very independent stage. And I think from there, the next level that becomes significant oftentimes is the assisted living level of care that people can go into an assisted living. And that's a very different step for most people. Right. In terms of what is assisted living.
Now, one quick question. The independent living, they don't actually get meals during the day or anything like that, right?
Well, many of them do not. I mean,
okay.
There are some that may, but most of them, it is an independent lifestyle, and a lot of people are able. They just want to live in a senior community. Maybe there's services available or activities that that are otherwise may not be available to somebody if they're living in their private residence.
So let's say we move to assisted living.
Okay.
How much does it cost a month about?
It can vary depending on the level of service that's needed or the facility, but we see in this area that they can range from say about $2,500 a month to about maybe up to $4,000 a month.
Okay.
Again, that's a range. You're going to want to check with each community themselves, but it is a much higher level of care. Now people have to still qualify. It's not just anybody who could necessarily be eligible. They have to qualify, medically and everything else.
I would say financially too.
And financially too, because assisted living tends to be, private pay. People are going to pay for that themselves. So one thing for people to do is sit down with family members, sit down with, a financial planner, financial advisor, an attorney, and start to realize, how could we potentially pay for this? Because the cost being $3,000 to $4,000 a month, say, on average, is daunting to a lot of people.
Draining.
But what they don't necessarily understand is, there may be sources for that. When we put the whole picture together and we look at somebody's income what it is, Social Security, maybe a pension. We also look, would there possibly be any eligibility for, veterans benefits, an aid and attendance that may be available, and it can be significant to help somebody pay for, assisted living care. Another thing that we, tend to look for is, how are that person's assets structured? How are they? We may have a client that comes in and says, I really don't have anything other than my house and maybe $15,000 to $20,000 in the bank. So how could I ever qualify for assisted living? Well, what they don't necessarily realize is that house, while it's an illiquid asset right now, may provide a good source for somebody down the road for assisted living expenses. And if it's sold, now all of a sudden that $20,000 bank account may be increased by $100,000 to $200,000 depending on the value of somebody's home.
Right.
And it might be a good source for that. Our experience is that people oftentimes have very favorable impressions of assisted living communities because, there is a level of independence and privacy still, but also there's, meals provided, and
Right.
we've, I've eaten at several of the local facilities and they're good meals. They have a lot of activities.
It's an amazing amount of activities.
Right.
It's
I mean,
impressive.
people go on, places into the community. They go into, they have shopping trips.
Right.
They have, events at the facility. I mean, people oftentimes, they have movie nights. I mean, there's a lot of, benefit. And it used to be that there was a lot of people that would think that I'm either going to stay in my home or I'm going to go to a nursing home one day. And that's
Right.
really all that there is.
Nothing in between.
And what people really need to understand is there's a lot of different options that are available nowadays that really provide for different levels of care. Sometimes somebody might not be really, nursing home ready. They may have early Alzheimer's. They may have a certain level of dementia. And there's a lot of good assisted living memory care facilities out there too that provide services, and that may be a good route for some people to go. Again, I stress people to understand, what are the options out there, and don't discount any personal circumstances, at least initially, and to say, oh, I could never qualify for this, I could never do that. At least find out first, at least put your, financial picture on the table and see what is out there before, coming to any, conclusion as to what you can and what you can't do.
All right, the last option is the nursing home care. How much does that cost on a monthly basis, and what actually covers it?
Nursing home care is a much higher level of care than would be provided. Oftentimes we see people maybe they're at home or in an assisted living facility. Eventually, I'm not sure it's quite 50%, but maybe almost up to 50% of people that are in an assisted living community will eventually need nursing home care. Nursing home level care is a higher level of care, and the cost is very significant. A lot of people don't realize right now that the private cost of care, in this area, the capital region, is approximately $9,000 to $10,000 a month.
Yeah.
So if we extrapolate over the course of a year, we're talking $120,000 a year potentially. And medical care these days is fantastic. People are living longer. People have longer life expectancies. Oftentimes, people, when they do go to a nursing home care, they're staying for longer because we have great medical care and people are living longer. So again, if we extrapolate that over time, $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year, year after year, people say, well, how could I ever pay for that, or how could I do that, or how would I qualify?
It's scary.
It is scary, but it's something not to get scared about. It's something to at least think about, to plan for. Not everybody's going to need nursing home care one day. People may, never get sick. People may, be able to stay at home, and that may work out. But people need to at least understand what's at stake, what's involved.
So does Medicaid cover nursing home care?
Medicaid can cover nursing home care, the cost of nursing home care. However, there are very strict eligibility requirements to qualify. So, somebody's not going to necessarily just say all of a sudden, okay, I need nursing home care. I'd like to just have somebody pay for it. It is $10,000 a month. We need to at least educate them into what the different ways are. Now, nursing home care is usually paid for in one of three ways, and sometimes it can be a combination. People can private pay themselves. They pay out of their own assets.
Okay.
Another way is if somebody has a long-term care insurance policy and long-term care insurance benefits in addition to maybe for home health care or assisted living, oftentimes cover nursing home care. They'll get a policy that
Okay.
has a per day coverage. And then when somebody does become eligible, they can apply for Medicaid. And Medicaid is a program that can provide for, nursing home care benefits. And it's important for people to understand that, what Medicaid is. Sometimes people confuse Medicare
I'm totally confused
and
between the
Medicaid.
two.
Well, it's understandable. Medicare is more of a health insurance, program for seniors. Medicare does not pay, throughout for skilled nursing home care. There usually is an initial coverage period, but it's not going to cover long term. The other thing is there's different Medicaid programs out there, obviously. Some people that don't have a Medigap or a supplemental health insurance will have Medicaid if they qualify, for medical assistance. That's also different than what we consider nursing home care Medicaid or, chronic care Medicaid and becoming eligible. What we're going to focus on right now is, what the eligibility requirements are to eventually obtain Medicaid for nursing home benefits.
Okay. So let's begin. On that note, the Medicaid eligibility requirements, let's say we start with a single person.
Okay.
So what are those?
A single unmarried person in New York State will have to qualify before receiving any sort of Medicaid benefits. First of all, you'll have to go through an application process, which honestly is quite detailed. In my practice, we oftentimes counsel people throughout this process, to and including representing them throughout the Medicaid application process. But to go back and to say to qualify, somebody will qualify if they have no more than a little over $13,000 in assets. Now that's a pretty
scary.
low threshold figure, but essentially if you have over $13,000, and these are the basic requirements. There are some variances, but if you have over, the Department of Social Services in your county and what you would qualify for would say, you spend your assets up until the point that you reach $13,000, and then at $13,000, you can essentially become, eligible.
Okay, so assets are a home, a car.
Assets would be assets would be, your home would be included, any bank accounts,
Okay.
Securities, stocks, anything that has cash out. Sometimes people will think life insurance policies may be exempt. Well, if they only have a death benefit and there's really no cash value to them, then they probably will be. But if they have an actual cash value to them, then they are going to be incorporated in the picture, because again, the determination is, well, if you have an eligibility to liquidate something, then you can go ahead and pay for your care. The other requirements that people are going to have to meet are that they can keep, once they do qualify, they're only eligible to keep $50 a month in income. So that's another, it doesn't leave people with a lot of room there, but they're going to have to, qualify in that regard. Now, people can keep, personal property. And the other thing that, there are some other exempt assets. For instance, we oftentimes, one of the first questions that we'll ask when, if we're looking towards Medicaid eligibility is, do you have, prepaid funeral or burial arrangements made? That's a good way to plan if done properly, meaning for the funeral arrangements, if they're an irrevocable, funeral trust, that can be an exempt asset. And it's expenses of funerals can be $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. So it's oftentimes a good way to make use of somebody's assets as they're spending down, to actually get to the point where otherwise, if they don't plan for that, that's a significant expense that would have to be borne somewhere else eventually.
Okay, so to get down to below $13,000 in assets, you said they can keep personal property,
Right.
but it doesn't mean that they can go out and buy a diamond ring
Right.
with the money from a house.
There
I mean,
are,
what does it mean?
there are some things that people can do, but if somebody can't necessarily just go ahead and say, oh, I'm going to buy a car with this, but there are legitimate things people can spend for. I mean, people can spend on health insurance. They can make any normal kind of spending, whether it's doing planning, whether it's financial advisors. Oftentimes, again, I mentioned earlier that making home renovations. If you own your home
Right.
and those kind of expenses, you're allowed. You're not going to be necessarily penalized for making improvements to your home. It's a good use of someone's money. It oftentimes enhances the value of somebody's home. The home is a little bit more tricky as you're trying to qualify for Medicaid. People will oftentimes come in and will say, "Oh, if I go to nursing home, they're going to take my house."
Right.
There's a yes and a no to that. If somebody qualifies and they can sign what's called an intent to return home, you can potentially keep your house during your lifetime and still qualify for Medicaid benefits. So let's say that individual has maybe $10,000 in assets, so they would otherwise qualify. Everything else makes sense. There's no penalized transfers right now. And they have a home and they're able to sign an intent to return home. Well, they can go ahead and keep their home, but what we want people to understand is there will be a lien placed on that home while they're receiving Medicaid benefits up to the amount of services that are provided on that person's behalf. So let's say, the Department of Social Services, the Medicaid program will pay, maybe $100,000 during their lifetime, towards the cost of their care. Well, upon their death, the first $100,000 of the sale of that property will be subject to a lien. So you may not, lose your home, but oftentimes you can be losing the value of it significantly, especially if you had otherwise planned for that to become part of your estate, or if you wanted that passed to another, to a loved one. We're going to want to at least understand what the significance of that is beforehand.
Right. Okay, and quick question. Does Medicaid have co-pays? Do they have to pay anything when they go for medical care? Well,
Medicaid, the way that Medicaid, for nursing home care is going to work is that once somebody's qualified, they're eligible now, they're qualified, and they're a Medicaid recipient for nursing home care benefits.
Okay.
Each month they're going to contribute to the cost of their care all of their income except for $50. So they're going to do that. Now, the other thing to understand is the Department of Social Services will make a determination as to whether or not they want them to keep their private health insurance. So if they do want them to keep their private health insurance and to continue to pay for that, they will be given a credit, but it's not really one way or the other, because if you're not given the credit, if you're given the credit, you're going to pay for your health insurance. And if you're not given the credit, you're going to cancel it and you'll be provided otherwise. So
okay.
essentially, you're limited to keeping $50 of income per month going forward. So, it is a little scary for people to think. And again, I stress, let's think about this far in advance before it ever becomes a reality. So we can at least see, if there's any planning that is relevant for people, or to at least understand, what is at stake later on.
Okay, so what we've just talked about is single person
Right.
eligibility for Medicaid. Now, what about a married couple? How is that different?
Well, let's discuss a married couple in the context of one spouse needing care and the other spouse, will not need care. Oftentimes, one spouse will be referred to as the medically needy spouse, or, the applicant recipient spouse. The other spouse would be referred to as the community spouse.
Okay.
They live in the community. The rules are different, but again, they should be different, because now we have one person that's going to continue to live in the community, live their life, and another person that's going to need an advanced level of care.
Okay.
So in this case, one automobile would be exempt. In addition, you would have a house would be an exempt, in addition to the other resources that I mentioned earlier, such as, the funeral trust, the burial arrangements, personal property. Now the income and asset threshold requirements are different. You're able to keep up to approximately $2,600 of income per month
Okay.
for the spouse, And it doesn't just mean that anything above that will be automatically, needed to contribute to the care. Usually they'll ask for a percentage of that income that exceeds, $2,600 a month to contribute towards the cost of the care. So it's not necessarily an all or nothing there. In addition, that medically needy spouse is able to still keep their allowances, the $50 a month and the $13,000 resource allowance. Community spouse is eligible to keep $75,000 in assets approximately.
Okay,
so it's a little different, but again, we're dealing with somebody that is going to continue to, wants to continue to live in their home, and that's going to want to continue to go about their life. But now things are going to change because the threshold requirements, whether it is for an unmarried person or for it's a married couple, it represents a significant change for a lot of people.
Right. Okay, so let's say there's a married couple and they both need to go in the nursing home. That's basically twice the amount of the single person?
If they both need to, yeah. Basically, at that point, then for the single person, it would be double the single person. They would each have their own eligibility. So in that case, the married requirements that I spoke of, where there's one spouse in the community, that wouldn't be applicable anymore.
Okay. Now, can you mention the Deficit Reduction Act
Sure.
in 2006? How did that change all of the rules?
Well, Peggy, it really made a significant change to the rules, and people need to be at least aware of what those changes were. The key date to really consider in New York State is February 8th of 2006. And when I say that, it often is very significant for any planning that somebody has done prior to that date or subsequent to that date. This act was it's federal legislation, and New York has adopted the Deficit Reduction Act, and it really changes the way that planning was done. Prior to that date, when people made transfers of assets, when I say transfers, it may be a gift of certain assets. Maybe they made an outright gift of a home, or they made a gift of cash, money, securities, in whatever way. But when a transfer is made for what we call less than fair market value, meaning that I give to my son, I give to my daughter, and there's no return in response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm trying to become eligible eventually. The rules that were in effect, and may still be in effect for planning that was done prior to that date in February of 2006, say that when those transfers were made, we're always going to say there'll be a penalty for those transfers. Right now, in this area, it's in excess of $7,000 a month. It's about $7,400, a little more than that, per month. And they say for each month that you transfer, for every transfer that you make in excess of $7,400, that would be 1 month that you would be ineligible to receive nursing home care services that you would have to pay for on your own. So the key component of that was, prior to the Deficit Reduction Act, that penalty would start the month following the transfer. So let's say somebody made a transfer in July, and then that transfer, the penalty would be in August. So the person may be in the community still. They may have no, intention of going for, into a nursing home or needing an advanced level of care anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
That penalty would start running immediately. So it was oftentimes planning was done saying, listen, let's let that, penalty go for, all these months, and we can, and even if somebody was in a nursing home, there were certain things that you could do to plan this way. The rules really changed significantly with this new legislation, and people need to understand now that any transfers, gifts that are made subsequent to that date will be treated completely different. Now, essentially, you have to get 5 years out, and otherwise, the penalty period is for those to be protected. Otherwise, if you're in need of services, the penalty will be applied for, and this is for in the case of nursing home care, the penalty will be applied only when you already meet the threshold requirements for Medicaid, and you are receiving nursing home care services.
So does
so
that
somebody
mean
might,
if I was going to sell my house now,
right,
and gift it to not sell my house, but give my house to my cousin or
Right.
something like that, I'd have to wait 5 years before I could be in a nursing home.
You would,
right?
well, before you could, before that asset would enjoy full protection in one sense. Now, there's other ways that people can go about, crisis planning, but essentially, if you want that to be beyond the look-back period, which is what people often refer to as, the
Okay.
look-back period, how far will Department of Social Services look back into transfers into somebody's, financial history? You need to have that exceed 5 years. So again, if that was done in year 1, you would need to get 5 years out before the month following before that would be a protected asset. Now again, people oftentimes say, well, how does that interplay with the old rules? Well, it really changes because you're not penalized now until you're already receiving nursing home care services and you're otherwise eligible. So if you made transfers that would otherwise be a 10-month penalty, you wouldn't have that 10-month penalty start until you're in the nursing home and already qualify for Medicaid. And you would say in that respect, well, how could I necessarily? Well, there's ways that you can plan, and there's ways that you can, if you work with an attorney, to at least address those circumstances.
Okay.
But it is a very significant change. So a lot of people that think about, self-help or, how can we do this quickly, will at least want to know what's at stake. What are the consequences? Is somebody, probably in need of advanced care soon? Or is the person reasonably healthy? What's the age?
Right.
What stage are people doing this at? That is a very important thing that you really want professional help to determine, because you don't want to just go out there and just
No.
make transfers and gifts and then really not know what the effect of doing that will be.
Well, now I know why people need professional help when they want to do transfers, because it's very confusing.
Right.
It's very complicated. All right. Lastly, we're going to talk about trust planning and gifts.
Okay.
You've already talked about it a little bit, but what are the general guidelines to follow?
Well, the first guideline to follow is, some of this will, how does this fit in with my estate plan? Maybe you have an estate plan, a will, or a way that things are structured. Mm-hmm. What somebody's going to want to do is they're going to want to look at the picture in a legal sense and in a financial sense, and what is this going to necessarily mean? Start to list all of your assets, everything that you have, what the effect, and understand how each asset would be treated. For instance, oftentimes a good planning tool for people will be to do planning associated with their residence. Things may not change significantly for that person. Right now they may be entitled to certain exemptions. They live there, they pay for all the upkeep of the property. Maybe a senior doesn't have a mortgage anymore. The house is otherwise paid for.
Right.
We look at, what options there are to make transfers that will still, keep the value of the house for the next generation. And, how does this, work with, any tax exemptions that somebody has, or even, tax planning
Right.
down the road. We see oftentimes that, if somebody makes a transfer of their home to an irrevocable income-only trust, to a trust that basically says that, I don't have the right to receive the principal of what I've transferred, I can receive the income. Well, in a transfer of a house, that may not, the income may not have any relevance. But essentially, everything might stay the same for the senior. Everything may remain the same. They'd have the right to live there for the rest of their life. Now a trustee could be in place that would be, maybe that's a son or a daughter, that will now, look over the affairs of the trust and will be bound, with fiduciary duties to make sure that it goes according to the way that the grantor has laid out the terms of the trust. But the good news is not a lot will change. The person, the grantor, would still have the same right to live in the house. They would still, pay for the upkeep and the maintenance and all of the expenses associated with the property. Mm-hmm. The only thing that would necessarily change is the title. But the other thing that we're trying to do here is protect the value of that. If we can get that structured in a way where we can get that 5-year clock ticking, especially when somebody is healthy, it can oftentimes be an excellent way to protect, what oftentimes is somebody's most significant asset. There's a lot of people that come in that their most significant asset is their home. And what better way to necessarily protect your home then in a way that will, really protect the value of it, and also, still provide for an orderly transfer, to their beneficiaries, to their children one day.
Okay. Boy, that's a lot of information.
It is.
And thank you for making it clear for our viewers. Is there anything quickly that you'd want to mention that we didn't cover?
There's nothing that is in specific. I think we had a good conversation about, a lot of different aspects of long-term care planning. The one piece that I would like to express to people is that I think is very important is having open lines of communication. At some point, you really have to discuss this with your loved ones, with your family members, with your trusted advisors, and come to terms with the fact that this isn't all scary. This is oftentimes protecting the fruits of your labor, protecting the people that you care about most in your life, and also realizing that at some point you need to have somebody or something in place that will help you. Oftentimes parents think of their children as still when they were young, and oftentimes we'll see that that child is an adult now. They have children of their own, and it may be appropriate time to release some control and to get some of the children. We have a great success with families that speak openly to each other, that that it involves children, that the children are there to work on the parents' benefit. And like I said, we can't stress communication and at least addressing these issues forthright enough.
Okay. And you have a website and a telephone number to mention.
I do. I practice in Albany, New York with the law firm of Burke Casserly. We do estate administration, elder law, and estate planning, and the website is www.burkecasserly.com. And our phone number is area code 518-452-1961. And again, we serve in many capacities, but we do a lot of estate planning and elder law, and work with people on a lot of the concerns that we discussed about today. So, and I really appreciate you having me.
Well, thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. We hope to see you next time on Focus on Health.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.